Welcome to the second session of the Water Conflict and Cooperation Conference that Tabadlab has put together for you today on World Water Day, March 22nd. Our second session today is going to focus on the many conflicts that exist at the intersection of water in Pakistan, be they interprovincial, transnational, or local in level. And in order to facilitate this conversation and to have its focus be more future-oriented, we have invited four very high-profile, very learned, and very distinguished speakers within this particular field. I will call them on stage one by one to come and join me. We have Ms. Afia Salam, a seasoned journalist, over 4 decades of experience. I was just commenting that when I first met Afia, I realized that I was not as old as she was experienced, and that holds true today as well. Alumnus of FNF, Australia Awards, and Elite Fellowship. She has served as a member of the National Coordinating Body for Marine Protected Areas and the Prime Minister's Advisory Body. She also served on the National Security Division's body for informing the nexus between climate and security in Pakistan. She's a development practitioner, holds the position of the elected president of Banbeli and Indus Earth Trust. I can go on for the next 45 minutes and I wouldn't really run out of things to say about Afia. So glad that you're here. Please join me on stage. Thank you so much, Afia. We also have with us Basharat Saeed, my old friend. He's a water resource specialist at the World Bank, has a tremendous background in research, project coordination, advocacy, but particularly focused on, as is the case with Pakistan, where mitigation is not as much of an issue as adaptation is. He's a climate change adaptation and water resource management specialist in the country. He's also served in leadership roles at the organization LEAD, where he has led initiatives addressing climate resilience and adaptation. And before World Bank and LEAD, Basharat contributed significantly to research efforts at the development policy. And I would say prior to all of that, him and I have had quite a few interesting evenings in the city of Lahore. Welcome, Basharat. Thank you so much for being here. My third guest is Fazilda Nabeel. She is an adjunct faculty at Lahore University of Management Sciences, teaching courses on the business case for climate action. Concurrently, she serves as the climate and water governance specialist for the UN FAO's Living Indus initiative, focusing on addressing climate and water-related challenges in Pakistan. With a PhD from the University of Sussex, a lot of her research focuses on the ecology of water resource governance in the Indus Basin. That's something I'm sure Husnain will also have a few things to say about. And also, Fazilda has an extensive experience in consultancy, having served in committees such as the Committee for Water Resource Management Law and Justice Commission for the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Thank you so much, Fazilda. Welcome. Please join me on stage. And finally, a gentleman who I've only gotten to know very recently, but very glad to be in his tremendous company. Husnain Afzal currently serves as the Director to Chairman at the Pakistan Water and Power Development Authority, or WAPDA. Before this, he held the position as an executive engineer, civil engineer at WAPDA for 13 years. He completed his bachelor's degree in civil engineering at the University of Engineering and Technology in Texila, Pakistan, and pursued further studies participating in the Fulbright Fellowship in Water Resources Engineering at Cornell right around the COVID period between 2020 and 2021. At some point, I would also like to know how that experience was. Thank you so much for being here, and please join me on stage. My first question to all of my panelists is going to be very much a softball. I think Basharat is going to have a few choice things to say about it, because him and I have had some preliminary discussions about it. But in the order that I've called you on stage, the softball question is, if we were to look at everything that we've discussed today, the 3 case studies, the additional case studies that my 3 colleagues shared with you, and we look at where things stand at this particular moment in time, are we prepared, proactively engaging, and at all aware of the tremendous length and breadth of the conflicts that engulf us as far as water resource management and stewardship in Pakistan is concerned? And I will start with you, Afia.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And that's not really a softball question. There are several questions bundled into one, and I will try to unpack that. Are we prepared has a one answer, one word answer, no. Are we aware? Yes, there is awareness, but within the fraternity. The awareness doesn't spill over into other sectors, so sector-specific awareness is there. And how intense is the problem? It's very intense, related to water, but is there a way forward? So I think there is. There are some faint signs that we pick on where we see a more collaborative structure emerging. There has been a lot of conflict around it, but I think we should put that conflict in the past, even while discussing things. Because there are some things which are not going to resolve. We've seen that. You know, you touched on Kalabagh Dam, Kabul, we have not really done what needed to be done when it could have been done. Right now, we don't have any kind of leverage to be able to make any difference. As far as the Indus Water Treaty, that's not really something that's going to happen overnight. And it's just wishful thinking that we can renegotiate it because obviously there are international guarantors that were there when the treaty was put in place. So unless all of them think that this needs to be negotiated, that's not happening. We still have an adversarial relationship with the country with whom the treaty impacts us. So I don't think that is happening, anytime soon. But we have had track 2. It stopped in the middle, it revived again, and that is the ebb and flow of the top level relationship between the two countries as far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned. So at track 2, the discussion points to the possibilities, the solutions. So if that top layer is cracked someday, and I don't know when, I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime, maybe my children will see it, that is when those solutions which the people at the track 2 level speak of, maybe then they will come forward and they will be implemented. Because I think the appetite to continue to dwell in that vitriol and animosity is not there in the newer generation. And that is why I think there is hope there that when they are able to call the shots, that they will be able to move away from that historical baggage. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but I engage with a lot of, the younger generation as well as the, whom you may call the peaceniks across borders and across the region. So South Asian countries, not just India and Pakistan, they don't want this conflict to boil over because it will impact the entire region, and that is not something that anybody would be looking forward to. So there may be solutions over there. Then the geographical location of Pakistan also makes it an imperative that we move towards solutions, and they cannot come unless and until there is a will for cooperating. And that has to be at different levels, obviously between the states, between the people. But when we are talking of conflicts, and your 3 presenters unpacked all those different levels of conflict, and tell me when I have to stop and pass it over. No, please do that, okay? I tend to ramble. I know my shortcomings. So there is the international level. Geographically, we are lower riparian as far as the Indus is concerned. We are in some places lower riparian where the Kabul River is concerned. In some places, we are the upper riparian. So that is meandering in a different way. So that's going to be, we will need a completely different dispensation if and when things settle down to the extent that we can work on that. But within the country, on the way here, I was reading the book, and I would urge people who are interested in these water issues to read Dr. Danish Mustafa's book, Contested Waters. Because he has given many different examples which are apples to apples. Starting from South America, we usually look at the Australian example of the Murray-Darling conflict as very, very similar to how our interprovincial rivalries pan out. But there have been cases where in other parts of the world also. And 2-3 days ago, there was this regional dialogue on transboundary issues which have been resolved between Bangladesh and India, between Nepal and India, And those transboundary issues now are being looked at as the way forward, the solutions to those. So I would focus more on the lower word here, cooperation, because going forward, because conflicts we know. Within our own country, we do all know about the interprovincial conflicts. But then there's another element here I would like to sort of throw into that mix, that within the province also, let's look at another, two other things happening. One is climate change, which needs to be centered in all conversations because that is going to impact our water conversation. And the other is the rapid rate of urbanization. And that is going to create that, and it has created that. I come from the city down south, right? I come from a lower riparian province, and within that province, I come from a city which is recorded as having the highest rate of urbanization in South Asia. So the people who are migrating to the cities, they are not bringing their water with them. So there needs to be an opening of the conversation of reallocation to a province where a lot of people are moving to the urban area. So we cannot only center it on the agrarian economy. There is this urban economy. Cities are the engines of development, as they say. But our cities are bursting at the seam. My city is bursting at the seams. So we need to sort of look at solutions on that score. I'll stop here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Afia. And I think one of the things that I spoke about at the very start, that quote that I gave about how we don't inherit from our ancestors, we borrow from our children. I think that's indicative, of course, of this larger pattern of getting stuck in the past and the history and the background and kya hua and kya nahi hua, instead of actually having a more future-focused and forward-looking sort of lens to apply to some of these very intertwined and complex conflicts. Basharat, I will come to you next. Same question.
So I'm perhaps a bit more cynical about this than Afia ji is. I think before we even get into the water sector, any time where there's a difference or there's a dispute, there needs to be some sort of a bare minimum level of trust between the agents if you are to have any progress or any constructive dialogue on contentious issues. And Pakistan currently suffers from maybe an all-time low when it comes to state-citizen trust, right? And the water sector will obviously leech off that or derive its own contentions from that fundamental breakdown in state-society relationship, right? But that's just a general point. And so it's not just about the water sector, it's about governance in general, and it's about how instruments or institutions of governance connect with the people they are supposed to govern. And I think, at least in my lifetime, it's hasn't been that long, but this is perhaps the lowest point on that front, right? Now, coming specifically to the issues that were discussed in the presentations, thank you for those presentations, by the way, very, very insightful. So, disputes or disagreements on water that could potentially lead to violence and protracted conflict. I mean, that's as old as time. I mean, there's a book I recently read called Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization. It's more about soil erosion, but it's inseparable from how water profiles changed across empires and how the inability to manage scarcity in a way that was mutually beneficial or that was not zero-sum was eventually what led to the downfall of great civilizations, right? And now we don't talk in civilizational terms anymore. It's nation states and sub-national actors, but the patterns are very similar. But things that stand out in terms of success stories have some principles, the way I see it. One, there needs to be some sort of an agreement on the terms of engagement on any dispute. Within that, there needs to be some sort of an agreement on a common language or a common vernacular, and where there are things that are open to interpretation, a mechanism for reaching consensus on what the best, most mutually beneficial interpretation or consensus is or needs to be. And lastly, and this is something that World Bank people get made fun of for saying everywhere, but yeah, you need a solid evidence base, right? In the water sector, it's different forms of data and how that data is processed. That entire architecture, which can help bring objectivity when things get a bit carried away for political reasons or for cultural reasons or any reasons, right? And in Pakistan, we seem to be lacking most of that when it comes to both citizen and agency relationship. So if if there's a water sewage board in Karachi, or if there's Wasa in other cities, their relationship with the state seems to be lacking all of these sort of terms. Or touch points, even within provinces, like the Indus apportionment accord. I wish one of the presentations had actually focused on that, right? Maybe it served a purpose at a particular point in time, but if you look at it a bit dispassionately now, let me put it this way: if you removed all the particulars, right? So the names, and if someone was reviewing it and they didn't know which country this was, they just had data and they just had the problem at hand and the background data and the annexes, they reviewed it, they would completely rewrite it today, because some of those things don't really correspond to the norms of good water management, or the norms of, or what we call best practices in integrated water management today. And so without that, right, there will obviously be disputes. And right, and most people will be well-meaning, but you will always have agents who will be on the lookout for these loopholes and for this vagueness to kind of like latch onto for a particular political agenda, right? And so without those tools, I mean, you can't really, I mean, one of my most respected senior colleagues is here, Hassan Saab, and I was very happy when he became a part of IRSA as a member from Sindh. But at the same time, I shudder to think what his life must be like, because he's an honest, learned man dedicated to better water management. And the tools that our country provides to people like that, when they're limited to using that, I mean, it often doesn't. The best possible options are not even options when you kind of have to go through those frameworks for conflict resolution or for dispute resolution, right? And just to contrast that, I mean, Indus Water Treaty is often, I mean, it's become like a punching bag at events, right? Oh, Indus Water Treaty, oh, do away with it, or it should never have been signed or something. But if you compare the instruments, like, for example, through IRSA, or even through the Council of Common Interest, the way conversations have evolved around disputes that are interprovincial versus the way they have evolved and in some cases been successfully resolved. In other cases, both parties have walked away with a degree of acceptance and have decided, okay, now let's move forward, right? The Indus Water Treaty in that sense has actually been far more successful than anything interprovincial in Pakistan, right? And it's because, again, those three things, agreement on terms of engagement, a common vernacular, or agreement on how to interpret the vernacular, and access to data, or respect for what the objectivity that data brings to water management.
Thank you, Basharat. All tremendous points. And yes, I agree. In addition to the three that you've specifically listed, I think, yes, you are right in that specifically within the state and the subject trust is at an all-time low, particularly, I would say, within the last 2 months. Data absolutely is king. And I think I'll come back to you for this particular point, but I think the whole idea of generating ambiguity in order to exploit loopholes is a long-standing practice, particularly when it comes to the water sector in Pakistan. What that means and how to mitigate that, we'll get to that in a second, but I'll go to Fazilda now for your comments.
Thank you, Zeeshan. So I think I'd like to start off and with what was said at the very outset of the session, Pakistan being a water scarce country, and really give my comments more of a governance framing, since that's my area of specialization. When we talk about Pakistan's water scarcity, and we've been with the scarcity being linked to conflict, and of course in the hope of better cooperation. When we talk about Pakistan's water scarcity, we often talk in terms of averages. I think Pakistan as a whole is not water scarce. We're sitting in a pocket which isn't water scarce. Neighborhoods, pockets, cities, regions are water scarce. So that's one thing. So what is a time and space issue? Definitely. The other thing is that at a local level, and effectively at a local level, even though there's the responsibility to water is pretty much an individual's responsibility. You and I have to worry about our water allocation. You and I have to worry about how water is going to come into our houses. At a community level, women have to walk distances to fetch the water they need. When I come to your question, and this is where you know, I'd like to make my key point. When I come to your question of where are we in terms of how prepared are we, I think in terms of in the last 4 years, let's just say, a lot has happened. You know, we've come up with many policies. Punjab has come up with the Water Act. 2019, 2020, KP came up with the Water Act. We have the revised National Climate Change Policy in place. We have the National Adaptation Plan in place. So these are the new policies that I'm talking about. If you talk about related to water and then climate and water intersection, if we talk about the Indus Water Treaty, that's in place. The Inter-Provincial Water Accord is in place. At the individual level, I said the water is very much an individual's concern. At an individual level, Pakistan's constitution guarantees a right to life, which in turn subsumes a right to water, right? And so do you know, all of the international agreements and international values systems that we ascribe to, including the SDGs, etc. Now, with all of this in place, I'd say that, you know, the architecture is in place. What the devil really lies in the implementation. आज भी जो हमने सारी case studies में गुफ्तगू की, a lot of that conversation was around, for instance, the Indus Water Treaty. Yes, the Afghanistan-Pakistan case study, in that particular case, the Indus Water Treaty doesn't include Afghanistan, it doesn't include China, which also is a part of the basin, and in fact where Tibetan glaciers are situated. But for all of the other things, there's a policy in place. The devil really lies in the implementation of the policy and the way, you know, it plays out. Take in, you know, case in point, the Water Acts. It has been 4 years. In Punjab's case, it has been 4 years. KP ke case mein, it has been about 3 years, and they have not been able to roll out the water resources regulatory authorities or the water resources commissions. You know, they simply they haven't been able to think about implementing the laws and the policies that they have come up with. Going back, even further back, National Water Policy 2018, you know, there's very little that, you know, happened after in terms of its implementation, in terms of coordination with the provinces. Yes, a standing committee was created, but, you know, in terms of effective coordination, very little has happened. So I think you know, when we ask, you know, are we prepared? Yes, on the face of it, yes. Theoretically, yes, but practically, no. You know, a lot. So I think one of the things that has really hit me is that in the last 5 years, 10 years, in this water climate space and this water conflict space, a lot has changed, yet everything is the same.
Thank you, Fazilda. One of the things that keeps coming up in the body of, in the case studies that we've looked at and the information that we've put together is that, to your point about how it's been 4 years, that, for example, when other things in this country have happened, for example, Article 25A, the right to education under the 18th Amendment, or post that, it took several years for provinces to adopt policies and rules of business that would then allow them to be able to actually deliver that. So maybe it just takes more time. I'm not sure how much of that is actually applicable here, or whether or not the severe political vitriol that has existed and engulfed the country over the last 2.5 years is partially responsible for us not being able to do some of the things that we wanted to do. But there is a case to be made there. Husnain, I'll come to you. I know I saved the best for last, I suppose. And I fully understand that this is not necessarily WAPDA's perspective, this is your personal perspective. That's not a spotlight I would put on you, but very interested in hearing what your thoughts are on the subject.
Thank you, Zeeshan. So, frankly speaking, my positioning here today gives the audience a good example of a low riparian, because much has been said already, and there is little left for me to say. But anyhow, what I'll do is to quickly dissect through the main themes of this conference, that the three main themes: transboundary, interprovincial, and local level. So first of all, transboundary level, now we are living at the age where, military technology has raised to a certain level that war is not an option. So what is the thing is that we have to move towards conventional water diplomacy tools. What are water diplomacy tools? I remember my professor Husnain from the very popular who wrote a book on water diplomacy. And he said that there are tools such as value creation, creating more water. And in case of Indus Water Treaty, value creation was done by, by the IFIs, World Bank put in more money here, and we were able to build Tarbela, Mangla, the whole system of link canals. Once our eastern rivers were, divided towards the Indian side. So that is one thing that, we have to focus towards water diplomacy tools on the transboundary level. Regarding the interprovincial level, one of the speakers spoke about Kalabagh Dam. Kalabagh Dam has been a source of conflict for like many years now. And I just want to give a brief thought in the minds of the audience is that Kalabagh Dam is also located on Indus River. Tarbela Dam is also an Indus River. Bashar Dam is also an Indus River. We are building Bashar Dam on Indus River. We have built Tarbela Dam on Indus River. Then what is different for Kalabagh Dam, which was okay for CCI to give permission to build Tarbela and the Bashar Dam? So basically, we need to sensitize people and to give them basic knowledge that this is the same river, same dynamics, and in fact, the benefits the Kalabagh Dam gives outweighs all of the things that I can speak in length as well. Coming to the local level, for the local level, I think it's time to realize that we always speak that government needs to do more. If we speak about Islamabad, we understand that there is a scarcity in Islamabad as well. It's a capital, and still you face scarcity, and scarcity by 100 times, in fact. If I'm not wrong, the availability of water for Islamabad is per day is around 66 to 80 million gallons per day. But what you require is 200 million gallons per day. What we have done is that we have built societies, housing societies. DHA was a housing society, Barrier was a housing society. Those were the potential sites where dams were proposed for supplying water for the locals. What we have done, we have built housing societies. So that's our national character. Speaking more of national character, what we do with water, we think it is a free commodity. I was speaking earlier with Basharat about water pricing. Whenever we leave the room, so I'm coming to the basics. Whenever we leave the room, we turn off the lights because we know that we pay 50 rupees per unit for the cost of electricity. But what do we do with water? We just, we are just washing our cars every morning with that water, knowing that it's a very, vital resource. So we have to build that national character as well, human character as well, that it's time, yes, governments need to, focus on that as well, but what is our role? What is our behavioral approach towards water conservation? So this is my, take on that, three components.
Thank you, Husnain, and thank you very much for sticking to the three layers that we built for this particular conference. Relaying your thoughts in terms of the transnational level, the interprovincial level, and the local level. I'll come to you, Basharat, next, and I'll ask the question that I think you and I have already been in conflict on. And that question, since last night we've been having this debate, and that question which gets asked at these events all the time, and I'm prefacing this by saying that it's not necessarily a good question. And the question is always, well, what are some low-hanging fruits that, we can look at in order for us to be able to sort of solve some of the water issues that we have? When the fact of the matter is that the problem and the quantum of the problem is so large that that question in and of itself is a disservice to the problem at hand. But I'll ask it anyway, because I know, partially because I know what your response is going to be, and partially because I also want you, as a very cynical man in your own words, to be able to let all of this out.
Thanks. So, I mean, just to be clear, the original question which I said I will not answer was, what is one small policy change that can fix the water sector, right? And I said that's a meaningless question, right? It's like a 10-second filler before you cut to commercials, right? So it's not a meaningful question. But this, what you asked, yeah, that I can get on board with. Well, one, going back to the first thing, the first intervention that I had, right? We need to build some sort of a consensus on what are the drivers of our water issues, right? Because, I mean, again, it depends on who the water user is, because for each type of user, there's a different set of issues, but ultimately it boils down to 2 or 3 core drivers of rot in our water management system, right? One is as simple as having a common definition for things, right? What does it mean when you say your water is scarce? Or what does it mean when we say Pakistan is getting very water stressed, right? I was very happy that this conference did not start with, you know, Pakistan is close to 1,000 cubic meter per capita and will soon become extremely water stressed. I mean, the thing is that it's a good conversation starter, fine, or a good conference starter, but it's a meaningless metric, right? I mean, in terms of water available per capita, like Singapore is perhaps the most water scarce in the world, right? Close to 50 cubic meter per person. Israel, most Gulf states, right? They seem to be, in terms of the security that the citizens feel, that water will be available for their municipal or domestic reasons or purposes. For the security that industry feels, that the water that is required for their processes to continue being contributing institutions in the country, that level of security, or even where there is even the security that the farmers feel, that despite it being a highly arid, quote-unquote, water-scarce region, there is a reliability to the service, water service, that the state or even private enterprises offer the consumers, right? I don't think any water user in Pakistan enjoys that level of security in any sort of service delivery related to water. And we have far more water available per capita than in these states, right? So one, we need to accept that, yes, water scarcity is a relative term, but yeah, it will increasingly become an issue as population increases. It's a very simple function of the denominator increasing while the numerator remains mostly fixed, right? So it's a mathematical reality that as populations increase, water available per capita will decrease, unless you're creating more water along the way, which is not happening, at least not in our country, in any meaningful way. So that's the first thing, right? Second is external threats, right? So in the context of Pakistan's water scarcity, often the big boogeyman is, oh, India will cut off all our water, or the slightly more reasonable one, but a bit exaggerated, that because of climate change, our water resources or water availability will go down, right? It is true that water demand with increasing temperatures will increase, but anecdotally, it sounds more horrifying than maybe it is when you lay it out across a 30, 40-year horizon, right? So some modeling work, which I would say is maybe the most credible around, was done by IFPRI, and they said that by 2050, water demand in Pakistan will increase by 60%. So it's a big increase from current water demand patterns, right? About 5 to 10% of that can reasonably be attributed to increasing temperatures. The rest all comes with increasing population, increasing urbanization, and other increases in water use that as you grow as an economy or as you transition as an economy will naturally go up, right? So, so we need to have a national, or at the very least, maybe you know, like a provincial consensus on what it means when we say Pakistan is water insecure. What do we mean by water scarcity, water depletion, all of these things, right? And what will help this cause is if we had a far more robust data infrastructure, where there is a screen that any citizen, or at least any department, any water management unit could access, and whatever is displayed there could be trusted, right? So you don't need to wait months, sometimes years, for a stack of files. Oh my, sorry. Yeah, so we don't need to wait months for a stack of files, you know, printed copies of data to be transferred to you. Then you engage your team to vet to see if it can be trusted, and then you raise objections and send I mean, this is how data sharing typically has happened, right? We recently wanted data for the water pricing thing that you mentioned from one province. I won't name the province. And yeah, we received printed copies of tables with very poor labeling and often like no sort of, you know, Yeah, no structure, and we ask for the soft copies. Like, no, for those we need permission from XYZ, a higher authority. That will take a few months, right? Any citizen should be able to look at the very least the basic metrics about water quality, water availability, forecasts, etc., that are relevant to them either as economic agents or as just water consumers, you know. And that simply doesn't exist. Without that, we will continue going around these circles and continue being influenced by political agendas and not actual natural resource management and sustainability agendas.
Thank you so much, Basharat. Those are some terrifying numbers. There's a conversation that I had with Rafi Alam recently because he informed me of a new area within psychology that's called collapse-aware. I'm sure you've heard of this term. And the idea being that people that, especially people that work on climate change and are really beginning to see how broken some of these systems are increasingly collapse-aware. And that's a form that's a disorder that now can be psychologically treated. And I feel like I might be getting there, especially when I have more and more of these conversations on a daily basis. Afia, I'll come to you next. Tabadlab recently put out one of the most comprehensive bodies of work on the economy of this country called A Raging Fire. And one of the key data points in that report was that the income per capita, or the GDP per capita in Pakistan between 2011 and 2023 has declined by 6%, whereas our debt per capita has actually increased by 30%. So our ability to actually make money is declining, whereas the debt profile that we have has increased by sixfold of that number in that same time. I know you started speaking about it, and then we went on in other directions, and Basharat has also shed some light on it very briefly. But population and urbanization, I think, are two big factors that are going to result in some of the conflicts we're going to see, particularly in urban environments in Pakistan. Could you speak to us a little bit more about that?
Sure. And I will wear my other hat, that of a journalist. I will forget for the moment that academically I have a geography background, so I have a little bit of idea of hydrology, etc. And as a journalist, I'm used to asking questions. And there are things that, I mean, he's a numbers man. Fazilda can interpret those numbers. I can't. I can also start crying when there are too many numbers thrown at me. But the questions that are floating around in my head is, one obviously is population. We don't talk about it enough. In any context, not just in the context of water, in other resources. We don't talk about the impact of population and the social fabric unraveling because of not being able to manage their health, their education, everything. So all of these are linked. And just to digress just for one moment from this topic is that we seem to claim that all resources are meant for us, the humans. The impact of the unmanageable practices of the natural resources is on the other creatures as well, which interact with us. You build dams. We had dolphins jumping around at Kalabagh. Now they are between Tonsa and Sakhar. That's it. So that's a huge biodiversity loss. Dolphins are an indicator of the health of your river. So you don't know how healthy your river is or not when there is no biodiversity left because of the human actions. So I just wanted to sort of, plug this in right in the middle of the conversation, that we have to see everything is, when we are talking ecosystem doesn't consist only of humans and their needs being met. So that's one thing. And as the population grows, we will be facing this deterioration of the other natural resources and other biodiversity. And this is why I would like to put on the lens of equity and justice. Now, what Basharat has said, per capita, we cannot be classified as a water-stressed country. Fazilda has very rightly said there are parts which are water-stressed. There are parts where you see these acres of golf courses and lawns. You can't claim that we are a water-stressed country. Otherwise, they shouldn't be existing here. You shouldn't be seeing these drivers washing cars with a hose in the morning, which I do when I walk here in the morning, and that gives me stress. So when we are talking about equitable distribution of water, then we also need to know how much water is available. Pakistan as a country has not done its complete water accounting. So it's not just that I'm scared of numbers. We do not have those numbers, as Bashar said. We have surface water. We calculate the amount of water that comes into our rivers. So that is surface water, you know, the river flow, the glacial melt, the snow melt, etc. There's a lot of underground water which is also being pumped out, not being accounted for. We talk of sinking cities, well, what else do you expect? If you remove the layer, it's not going to exist in a vacuum. They will sink. And the third is the recycling of water, which can be used in so many sectors where we are using these municipal water, which is invested in heavily to sort of make it potable. None of us trust it anymore that it is potable, so we use other, you know, those who can, they do, those who can't, they use the same water, or water which is even of poorer quality. Just go away from the main roads and into the, you know, distant parts of Balochistan and Sindh, the kind of water that they have access to. In the bigger, more, you know, elitist areas, you wouldn't even feed to your animals. So here is a question of equity. First, we need to know how much water is there and how much can be used again. There are industries now, this is why I said we need to center the conversation of climate change as well. Industry is being asked to move towards circularity of systems. That circularity of systems will free up a lot of water which we are just, you know, throwing into the rivers and water bodies and polluting them as well. So that water we need to account for, and we need, that's where what Fazilda works on is governance. Governance and implementation of policies, we have to. There's a lot of wastewater that can be used again. And that also needs to be part of the water accounting. It's only then we can talk about the equitable share, benefiting, again, the constitution, which ensures the right of life, does not mean only the availability of water, but the quality of water. So I see a lot of conversation being centered on the quantity of water, the volume of water that is available, and not on the quality of water. So that is something also that we need to work at in tandem. And the other is that, yes, we talk of these water infrastructure to ensure that the population can be fed through growing enough food. But there are countries with far less water, which are growing more than us. Your crop per drop report was it was something that we should be ashamed of, the way we are using water. There's so little productivity. And again, he's a numbers man and he'll tell you, and he'll make that point, that why are we not using that water sensibly for it to be available to go around to a lot more people? There are research reports which are also mixing, or rather linking it with the element of violence and gender-based violence. There's a very good report by Dr. Nausheen Jameel of IBA Karachi, who's the director of Karachi Urban Lab, and they did their research in a poor locality of Karachi, while Danish Mustafa did it for the Lai river. I will not call it Nala, otherwise he will kill me because it's a river. Yes, it is a river. I mean, in Karachi, people say Nala, Liari, Naldi, or Nala. It's not, they are rivers. So those are exacerbating the power structures within the home and leading to gender-based violence. And please look up those reports and make a composite conversation about water, because it is not only about the volume. We have to talk about other things in this. And as for the dams and the Kalabagh, I would invite everybody to take just one trip to the Indus Delta, and I will not even have to sit here and say anything about why there shouldn't be more dams. Last year, or year before that, I traveled on the Indus River. Okay, I'm going to point out that. And while traveling, by the time we reached Sakhar, we were into the heat wave. And we were staying at the irrigation rest house. And the engineer said it in such a, you see, that I can't do anything about this, and this is it, that the river flows were being stored at Tarbela, whereas there was time for the snow melt and the glacial melt to be stored there. The spillway of Mangla opened, I think, somewhere in July. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And this I'm talking about May. Sindh had already harvested its crop and readied its land for the next crop. No water. And the heat wave. So, I mean, there you need to see the equity, the distribution mechanisms, and how, what are we actually trying to look at. It has to be in a composite manner.
Thank you, Afia. Every time I have one of these conversations with you, there's 16 different new points that I have to think about. And fitting all of that into the matrix that I've built into my head gets increasingly complicated over time. But I think this is a natural transition to Fazilda, not just because you mentioned the drop per crop report, but also because of the work that you've done on the political ecology of water management in Pakistan. So if you could just shed some light on that. But right before you get into that, I have one more question for Husnain after this. Then I'll ask a forward-looking question about, what are some of the potential conflicts that we might face in the future that I would like all of our speakers to address briefly one by one. And then if, depending on if we have time, we can open it up for a Q&A session from the audience. So if you have any questions, please think of those now. Fazilda.
So most of the political ecology work that I did focused on groundwater, and particularly in the Punjab. So I've traced the history of groundwater governance from the pre-colonial times through the colonial times, post-colonial, and then up to the contemporary, up to and including the contemporary period. Afia is right. So in the surface water, the groundwater allocation, rainwater, which is I'll come to that also. Maybe that connects to your question on what can be done, and maybe in the next round. But Pakistan is the 4th largest extractor of groundwater in the world. This is a statistic that I quote often, we're the top groundwater exporter. That means that the amount of groundwater that is, so the amount of groundwater that are export products that is embedded in our export products, like textiles, like rice, like other things, other export items. We're the top exporter of groundwater in the world. We're extracting from the Indus Basin aquifer, and again, which is a transboundary aquifer, but does not get mentioned or studied much. And the Indus Basin aquifer is the 2nd most overstressed aquifer in the world. Right, so we're in the top 5, and as far as, or maybe in the top 2, as far as each of these glaring statistics is concerned. Groundwater ke andar, so I took again a policy, and then in the form of case studies that I did, I look at industrial groundwater use. There's, of course, the quantity issue, which you've covered in the case study of Lahore, equally a quality issue, where some of the areas that I worked on in the outskirts of Lahore and adjoining industrial cities, secondary cities like Sheikhupura. So on the Lahore-Sheikhupura road, there are about 700 industrial units. None of those industrial units are connected to a drain. Most of the industrial units, they discharge their groundwater in unlined pits called kuas. And the unlined pits take that industrial effluent down to the groundwater, which then contaminates the underground aquifer. In some of the farmers that I worked with, and some of the farmers that these were rice, this was in the rice belt in Sheikhupura, where we were looking at water conservation activities and how well they're taken up by farmers. Some of the farmers that I worked with, they know that they can't irrigate their crop with that groundwater if that's been, pumped from less than 50 feet, because if you pump that water and you put it in a glass in about half an hour, it turns yellow in a transparent glass. Right, so there's severe quality issues, even and this, the history is important because traditionally, the Rachna Doab, Sheikhupura, had been a sweet water zone. It is where Nestle set up its first factory, the bottled water plant back in 1998, the first in the world, right? So it's important how we went from that to where we are now in a span of, less than 2.5 decades. So groundwater is, and also, you mentioned, again, connecting a little bit to the future. Groundwater, yes, 90% of groundwater is used for agriculture, about 6% for domestic use, and according to the available statistics, they say only 2% is used for industry. Right? One of my key contentions is with this available statistic, because what is not measured cannot be, you can't put a number on it. Your industry contributes about 20, 22, 24% to your GDP, depending on what year you're looking at, on average. And yet it only consumes, and most of that industry, particularly the export industry, is water intensive. Your textile, your pulp, and your rice, etc. Right? How can it consume only 2% of the water available, right? And then when none of this analysis takes into account whether the industry is, using surface water or groundwater, and then where the discharge is going. So I feel that these are important sort of aspects that, we need to keep in mind as far as, the lay of the land as far as groundwater is concerned, its use is concerned. Yeah, and I'll end at that.
Great, thank you, Fazilda. I actually didn't know that the Lahore-Sheikh Burra Road had 700 industrial units. I knew the number was high. I didn't realize it was that high. And the fact that not a single one of them is actually connected, that speaks volume to the quantum of the problem that we actually face, and how many different aspects of this we need to manage, and perhaps another case study for my team to look at. Husnain, before the final question, one last thing for you. We've seen throughout the course of the conversation today that the Indus Water Treaty keeps coming up. And that is, of course, because Pakistan is fed by the river Indus, with its many tributaries and rivers that flow into it. It is central to Pakistan's agricultural industry, its economy. Speak to me about the viability of the Indus Water Treaty, the potential of renegotiating it, and where some of the problems currently lie, and what the future holds for us as far as our relationship with India, which I might add at this point, especially given the elections that have happened in Pakistan, the elections that are now pending between April and June 4th in India, and the almost inevitability of the Modi government coming back, and therefore not really any possibility of a thawing of relationships. Where do things stand now?
So the Indus Water Treaty, as everybody knows, that it was signed some 6 decades ago. And may I say that by that time, the average water flows and the climatic conditions were fairly consistent. The treaty was basically on the divisions of the water rather than sharing the full benefits out of it. If we speak out about the eastern rivers, which were allocated to India, the downstream reaches, like the downstream reaches of Satluj, Ravi, and Beas, were turned into sand dunes and deserts because of the treaty was, the essence of treaty was on the division of rivers. So the treaty missed out on several key factors, like the groundwater recharge potential was lost, the flora and fauna was disturbed, climatic conditions, population growth was increasing. So all those factors were not considered at the time of inception of treaty. Speaking on the western rivers, I'll just touch upon just one point on the western rivers, which are allocated to Pakistan. As per treaty, India has the right to build as much as run-of-the-river plants, hydroelectric plants on the western rivers. So speaking specifically on Chenab, for example, India has over the years built many hydroelectric plants. For example, Baglia, Ratle, and Salal. All of these, by the way, are under disputes. And the dispute lies in the factor that even the hydroelectric plants do not have a live storage, but they have pondage for a certain period of time to attain a certain head so that your plant can produce hydroelectric power. Water can pass on the turbines to generate that electricity. For example, Bagliar Dam has a storage for that purpose is 321,000 acre-feet. Now, the critical point which I'd like to underline is that if India, by design, you speak about the political, diplomacy in that. If India decides to deplete Bagliar Reservoir for, whatever reasons, for the purpose of sedimentation, or removal of sedimentation from its weir, and it starts filling that reservoir in the lean flow periods of December, January, February. It can dry up your Chenab River for 26 days. So now your water security is compromised here. Now, what's your water security? Your water security is the, it's the availability, accessibility, quality, and quantity of water. And when that accessibility is compromised, it can lead nations towards a matter of national security. And in our case, it is also a matter of interprovincial disharmony, because you will be short of water during those lean period of days. So this period, this point is to be contested in future. We have provisions in the treaty. Article 12 provides you that provisions. Now, I may beg to differ from a perspective which was said by Madam earlier. I would say that it is shamefully funny to note that at the time when Tabadlab was completed in 1976, Pakistan's water storage capacity was around 20 or 18 million acre feet. And the population at that time was around 68 million. Now we are standing at a population of 224 million, and our storage capacity is 13 million acre feet. So now coming back to the conjunctive reservoir operation, which India will use against us to barrier that water during the lean periods. Now it's important to understand that conjunctive reservoir operation for ourselves too. Now just try to understand that once you will have Jamir Basha in place, you have already Tabadlab in place, and if you have Kalabagh in place, you will operate those reservoirs conjunctively. So when you will have a lesser amount of water for the rabi crops, for example, you will be having regulating water from Kalabagh, let's suppose. As it is said that, for example, if we are storing water from the glacial metal in Tabadlab, what we can do is that we can, once all these projects are operated integratedly, you will solve this problem of lean flow periods, or as our downstream reaches are short of water. So basically, the concept of reservoirs is that they do not block water or store water. They regulate water. This is the concept which we need to tell the people, that we need more reservoirs, not only for storing that much amount of water. We need to regulate for the lean flow periods. So once we will operate, it happens everywhere. It happens in the US as well. So what they do is that they operate reservoirs in tandem. They operate for hydropower at certain time of the year. They operate for, they know that now it's the time for cropping pattern. They release water in a conjunctive manner from different reservoirs. That is the concept.
Great. Thank you so much, Husnain. My final question is going to be to all four of my esteemed guests. As I mentioned earlier, that has to do with what the future holds. There is a tremendous body of research that is out there. We mentioned 26 case studies, but the number of case studies that was in the pool from which we selected was north of 70. And now from that, we selected 26, and then another 9 with which to highlight, some of which you saw on the screen in session 1 here today. So there's a lot of work that already exists, some things that we already know about what the future holds. But this question has more to do with, A, what are some immediate things that can be done in order for us to prepare better for things that are coming up in the future? And more importantly, how do we prepare policymakers, academics, journalists for water-related conflicts in potentially areas of cooperation that we simply cannot predict at this particular moment in time, or don't have sufficient data? Basharat, I think twice in both of his answers, has mentioned the need for a very, very regimented data regime, which simply seems to be lacking from the discourse at the moment. So what are some of those things that we should be paying attention to, and what are some of the conflicts that might pop up in the near future? I'll start with you.
Okay, so like I said, there's no silver bullet. So it can't be a one-word answer. But the word Basharat used, we need to use a lot more often: integrated water resource management. And that has to be on the basis of data. Like I said, we do not know how much groundwater. Dr. Fazilda has said we don't even know how much we are using. How much of the water is available, the wastewater which can be recycled, that can be used, so we don't have that complete water accounting. So without data, it's just conjecture. And these are, I can just say something out of the top of my head. that these are the potential areas of conflict. They already exist. We need to look at the areas of cooperation. And they will come only if they rest on incontrovertible data. Now, technology here offers us a hope, because how is everybody else in the world having access to data? Technology-assisted data can be used here as well. It's the question of, like I said earlier, the equity, the justice. That data has to be shared. When it is shared, then you will be able to assess what are the points of conflict, where are the opportunities or possibilities of cooperation. So we need to sit together. The other hopeful thing, like I said, some of the things that have happened in the recent past, they give hope. There are two major projects which the government of Pakistan has rolled out or approved. One is the Living Indus, and the other is the Recharge Pakistan. Now, within these projects, a lot of water issues which are tied to your social, economic issues as well as biodiversity conservation, all these things are embedded within those two projects, which can be a way forward for Pakistan. So I would rest my hopes over there, you know, because over there the local community element is also there. We can get the knowledge of what they used as solutions, and then of course with the assistance of technology and new data and new science, we can you know, take benefit of it. So I'm not without hope. It's just that the frustration of the pace of things that happen, and the population keeps growing, and our response to their needs is not commensurate with that growth. In fact, that growth also needs a solution. Our population, you know, the track record of our interventions in population is not something to write home about. So it has to be an integrated approach, and the SDGs actually gave us that pathway. Now we have our adaptation policy. But in the absence of that adaptation policy, we still had a pathway. Because to achieve goal 1, to zero hunger, you have to go to goal 17, right through, but goal 17, which calls for cooperation, collaboration between different stakeholders, because without that, you can't get there. So I think that was a very good, that's a good roadmap, and it's not irrelevant. Yes, we've missed all roadmaps that we have signed on to, but that doesn't mean that we stop right now. I mean, we still have a few years. Even if we pick up on 1 or 2 of them and achieve something, not claim to have achieved something, because I think goal 13, which was climate action, was that Pakistan has achieved that in 2020. And look where we are now. After the floods, have we achieved it? So let's not make claims, let's not make false claims, but let's keep moving towards that path which we chose. Nobody put a gun to our temple and said, sign the SDGs. Pakistan is amongst the first countries to raise its hand at international forums, say, hum ye karenge, aur phir miss kar jate hain. So we need to honor our international commitments, and we need to move towards the pathways that we have actually identified for ourselves to move forward.
Thank you, Afia. Bash, will come to you next.
Sorry. So, so in my I think this is it me or is it the mic? Okay, good.
Do you want to use mine?
Okay, cool. I tend to be a very moderate and regulated person, so this is a bit uncharacteristic. Okay, so just I'll also just to make my point, also respond to a few things that Husnain said in the larger spirit of, you know, why we need a consensus on some at the very least on how we will choose as a nation to interpret certain things which might be vague, and why there is a need to fill in data gaps and knowledge gaps, not just data. It's about the information and the knowledge that is derived from it, right? And how to what end we use it, right? So just a couple of things, right? We mentioned the Baghliar one. Now again, I'm not a dam expert, right? But I looked at these things with interest, right? The specific issue of sediment management in Baghliar, which you alluded to, right, which is you said could potentially, because they want to flush out the sediment, it might empty the gates. The technical issue that Pakistan had, that they took to the commission, right, was that this design for Baghliar had low-gated spillways, and that would mean that they could choose to retain more water in a given quantum of time, right? And they said, no, this is global best practice in how to deal with sediment buildup regularly and not have to wait for big, multi-million-dollar dredging exercises, or not to have to just live with the fact that we are losing storage capacity because we can't do anything about it, right? So that, as per that design, I mean, Pakistan was very, I could say, annoyed with what the neutral experts said in this, but in retrospect, maybe, yeah, there was, it would actually preempt or prevent one of the catastrophes that you claimed could happen. The second was, what is the decide to fill in the lean period? That is part of the agreed design, right? In fact, specifically with Baglia, the dam that you mentioned, in 2008, they went beyond the agreed dates of the year where they are allowed to fill the reservoir, which I believe is 31st August. They went over by a few days. And this was contested by Pakistan. The long series of meetings, they shared data, they had visits, and at the end, and this was almost like, seems too poetic to now be true given where we are today. But India basically said, oh, apologies, there was some mishap, whatever, right? Won't happen again. Pakistan's response was, we will accept in the spirit of goodwill and cooperation. That was the end of that, right? So this, but again, if these things were discussed more dispassionately and more honestly, right, at all the right forums, and this wasn't always just hijacked for political ends, more people would know this and would have trust in these mechanisms working, right? And that was exactly my point, right? But wait, it can't be personality-driven trust. You can't say, oh, someone is a very honest person, so we'll trust him. You need to have a system that engenders trust. Maybe my generation will never regain that trust, but maybe people slightly more younger, they see the system evolving, they're like, you know what, next time we are told something about the Pakistan-India water issue or the Punjab water issue, we will actually be able to verify and therefore believe what we are being told, right? So that was, and then just now to answer the question that you said, I've spoken, I think, a lot about the need for data and transparency and trust, so I won't talk about that, but two very specific things, right? One, we need an agricultural transformation. If you want to fix the water issue in Pakistan, issue with water security, water scarcity, whatever you want to call it, right? It can't come from how urban consumers turn off their taps or if they stop washing their cars or less frequently. Those are all, don't get me wrong, that's absolutely essential because we need to have a conservationist or environmental ethic as part of our DNA, right? That is absolutely necessary. But in terms of the macro picture of our water resources, right, without a transformation that massively jacks up water productivity in agriculture so that we can reduce water use but not compromise food production or economic production, right, that is absolutely necessary. Currently, Pakistan, we say we are an agrarian economy, we are amongst the 10% worst performers when it comes to agriculture water productivity. Right? And again, this could lead into a video that I already did for Tabadlab, right, which was on agricultural subsidies, so I won't get into that. Last thing, on storage, on the issue of storage, start looking at storage in a more integrated way, groundwater, aquifers, that is actually our biggest storage. It does the same thing that you said, right? When you have excess water through rainfall or through the flood season, it stores it lets it percolate so that now we have enough technology that we can pump it in the lean season. You mentioned that our million, how many, I think it was 9 or 10 million acre feet is our current storage capacity, maybe.
13 million.
30 million acre feet, right?
In the highest.
In the highest, 30 million acre feet, right? When you look at our national water accounts that Afia ji spoke about, right, there's a thing called a volume balance error, which sounds, it basically means about the 13%, the volume balance error on average is 13% or 15%. That means that amount of water, we have no idea where it's going, right? Because we look at inflows and we look at outflows, and in the volume balance error in our national water accounts is on average 13%. In years, it's been about 20%, right? 20% of our total inflows is about 30 million acre feet. So that is double your dam storage that we don't know where it's going. Some of it seeps to the ground, recharges groundwater, some evaporates, some might be stolen. But the point is we should know. So you tell me, right, if you can have enough of a data infrastructure to tell me what this balance error actually means, where it's going, right, and account for things like internally generated runoff and groundwater use, you give me that and I can tell you what to do with this extra 30 million acre feet. That will magically, statistically appear because finally we'll actually be doing water accounting. Thank you.
Thank you, Basharat. That's Thank you. I think I'm going to have to call my psychologist, especially after that last number. I didn't realize that we keep coming across, even when we were putting together what we lovingly call the dead deck, but what is actually called a raging fire. We kept coming across these statistical anomalies in official data, which might be a few percentage points, but once you multiply them with billions of dollars, it turns out to be a massive amount of money that is unaccounted for. And that can, of course, lead to a lot of other problems. Fazilda, I'll come to you. Then Husnain, and then we'll take just a couple of questions from the audience because we have about 10 minutes before we wrap this up.
So for me, the future and the hope lies in communities. I think, yes, we can look towards our policies, our governance, our institutional architecture to bring about change. But change from bottom up is, where I'm really banking on. So, for instance, we talked a lot about data and how there's a lot of missing data, and then Afia talked about Living Indus. One of the key interventions in Living Indus is a crowdsourcing platform, right? There are countries around the world where water quality, for instance, is being measured by communities, with the help of cell phone apps. Of course, the resolution of what that app is able to measure in terms of the quality isn't 100%, but it is some measure as opposed to no measure, right? And then in another project, for instance, I think it was FCDO or the EU, but they distributed water testing strips and filters to low-income communities, so low-income communities could test their water, and then perhaps if we link it to the app, upload quality statistics where we'd know where are the quality, the bad quality hotspots and the critical areas. I also feel that where a lot of, one aspect is crowdsourcing, another very important aspect is community mobilization around solutions. For instance, making community ponds, and these community ponds are not something that are going to be introduced from the outside. A lot of these communities are already engaging and using community ponds. Malik Saab is here from GBTI. Other organizations, other RSPs have also instituted these earthen community ponds which store water for the communities in times of drought. There are some very good examples from Thar, some from DG Khan, some in Lachi, right? So community-based water solutions, rainwater, which is a significant part of our water accounts, can be harvested and stored in these with these communities where just with a little bit of structure from the government, with some facilitation from the government, these could be self-sustaining, as these are already, being practiced, for instance, in the hill torrent areas. They're being run completely on the basis of customary law, which also, by the way, is a big chunk of our water supply that is not harnessed.
Thank you, Fazilda. And Husnain, I will come to you last.
So I think about 3 to 4 points regarding that. First will be the groundwater is highly unregulated. It's been extracted at the will of people. Take for example of Nestle. They give you a water bottle of like 40, 50 rupees, small bottle, and once we extract the water, there is no accounting for it. So it has to be some regulations to be developed on the groundwater extraction, some price to be fixed on groundwater extraction as well. Secondly, I would say an associated point is smart lining of canals. By smart line of canals, I mean that you do line canals where there is brackish water or there's issue of waterlogging and salinity, but you do not line water where the water quality is sweet. So it will go both ways. It will help reduce water losses due to evaporation and all that. Third point will be the concept of virtual water. By virtual water, you mean that in terms of cropping, if there is a water-intensive crop, you stop cropping it or in your country, import it. But do start cropping those crops which are less water-intensive. Number 4 would be carryover capacity. I hate to feel like a spokesperson of WAPDA, but the carryover capacity we have is 30 days. By 30 days, I mean that in case of drought, we have 30 days of water in our reservoirs, in generally. So, we need to focus on that aspect as well. Silver lining, after years of neglect, we are on track of building, we are on track of doubling of what we have today. By the end of 2030, we'll be around the figure of 20 million acre feet in water storage capacity. We will be doubling the power generation by 10,000 megawatts, which will, reduce your overall bills, energy bills, and the circular debt, menace of circular debt. And obviously, once this system is in place, we'll be able to irrigate 3.9 million acres of barren land. Thank you.
Thank you, Husnain. All great answers and great potential solutions and areas for us to look into, especially when it comes to future conflicts. The one thing that I did want to mention is an area that I'm increasingly beginning to look more into, particularly as we study the case studies, is the problem of evaporation. We know that we are moving towards a 1.5 degree world, and that's the global average. Pakistan, unfortunately, lies at the bad end of that average. The average temperature rise in Pakistan currently stands at 2.8 degrees Celsius, which inevitably is going to lead to significantly more water evaporation. And that register that you're speaking about, that the delta of the 13 to 15% might in fact increase well past that number, which further underscores the need for us to be able to track all of this before we can propose any kind of solutions for it. I'll open it up to the audience. We have about 5 minutes for any questions people might have right over there. I know I have 2 people with mics that are running around. I will ask if there are any comments. You can share them during the iftar. This is only for questions. If there's a specific question, please go ahead and ask it. And I would ask you to be brief. I'll be very dictatorial about this.
May I start? Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ali Jabir and I am an environmental journalist working at APP. My question to the panelists is that Ma'am Afia Salam mentioned about the Living Indus initiative. But the strategy of the government is to chip in this project through private sector engagement. This initiative will have multiple strategies and initiatives. Do you think the private sector has the appetite to chip in this project? Because I don't feel it. Because this will incur a lot of, it's a multi-billion-dollar project. It's capital and both resource and technology intensive initiative. Will they be indulging in this? And for Mr. Husnain, I have a pertinent question that the Ghazi Brotha project was mentioned here. The way the community engagement was done, it was one of the successful initiatives in that regard. Why WAPDA didn't replicate this example in other projects that were, like in Diame, they faced this issue of compensations to be given to the local communities. Why this kind of strategies are not replicated in your other initiatives? Once you have a good example at home, why it's not being replicated? Your comments on that?
Can we just take 1 or 2 more questions before we go to the right over there?
Okay.
Short questions, please.
Thank you so much for sharing the mic with me. I am sustainability ESG professional. And my question is to all of the panelists, anyone can answer. During all this discussion, I found there are a lot of uncertainties. Some are aligned with the industry, some are aligned with the diplomatic relation. Either it may be with the Afghanistan or some may be with the India. So after listening all these concepts and after you all are doing a lot of research, and definitely your research and your work are incentivized by sometime either maybe by the industry and sometime either by the government. So after assessing all this situation, what will be the policy framework for you and the diplomat as well to come out from these uncertainties and go for the mutual cooperation? We generally need a mutual cooperation from micro level to the macro level. So there are a lot of work. We have to align our work with the ESG integration and after sum up. So my question is basically...
Thank you. Question taken. Do you have one? Yeah, just instability and then we'll go.
Time on this issue, I've spoken to different people like Hafiz Baloch, Hassan Abbas, who have identified some key things that are like put here. The first is the role of the international financial institutions. And my question is specifically for Afia. How do we see the role of international financial institutions, IFIs? How have they contributed to the problem, or how have they made it better? And the thing I've heard a lot about is the imperial system of water management, the canals, the dams. How have they contributed to our problems, or how have they made it better?
Great, thank you. Afia, I'll go to you next. Husnain, I think there was a specific question asked of you, and then the two of you for the question asked by the gentleman over there. And sorry, if I may also ask to keep the question very brief, because we have to wrap this up in about 5 minutes. Afia?
The question Ali here asked about the living Indus and the private sector interventions. May I just mention here that any of the word circularity which I have used has been through the private sector and especially the export-oriented industries. So they are taking that, because there are global standards which they have to meet. If Pakistan doesn't comply to them, then we are not exporting anything. We've been slapped with so many bans because of our lax standards in different fishing, etc., aviation. So the first movers are those industries which have actually an international. It's a business case. Living Indus is a large piece which has to, that's an elephant that has to be eaten bit by bit. There's community intervention. There's international funding that will be required to take some of the projects on. The community pondage she has mentioned, that may not require so much, but there will be, because the industries are located along the Indus. And they have been the ones who have been polluting the Indus. So they have to be a partner in the solution. And they are showing their willingness. So right now, the way Fazilda will be able to explain more, because she's actually involved in that. I'm just sort of, interested in it, so I keep trying to find out and speak about it. But basically, this project is several projects in itself. It's a big program, and it is several projects within that. And there's a role for the industry, there's a role for local private sector, there's a role for community organizations, there's governmental interventions, as well as international institutions. The other question this young man had asked about the role of the IFCs, it is not only in the water sector. So this is not something 70 years down the road, now we say we don't want it. Yes, this is how we have been in this debt trap. And either there's going to be this entire upheaval and a revolution that will get us out of the debt trap, and like I think a couple of South American countries will say, we're not paying up. And then it took them a couple of generations to be able to become self-sustaining. So do we have that appetite? Yes, on the streets we say कि इसको बाहर निकाल दो, उससे IMF से बात नहीं करनी, वो नहीं करनी, लेकिन फिर क्या करना है वो भी तो आगे टेबल पे रखें कि हम इन सब से अपने आप को दूर कर लें, तो कुछ अपनी पहले हम resources to generate करें ना. So then I think this is something that maybe even Fazilda can show, that it's not that we are hostage to those IFCs and we have to listen to only what they say. Those were the days of the 60s when the IWT was signed. It was a coercive agreement. The people had no input in it. None of the people, because we had a dictatorial government. It was, that decision, the IFCs, he said yes, and that's it. Yep. So that's a treaty we got lumped with, for better or for worse. And it has worked for us in many ways. Yes, now we can see some of the other, holes in it. But either we say no IFCs at all and Pakistan will function and we'll move forward, with the difficulties that will come with it. We have to have that appetite for bearing with those difficulties, and that is the only way to move away from the IFCs.
So I'm so sorry for cutting you off, but just very brief comments from Husnain, Fazilda, and then finally Basharat.
Because people really don't know what WAPDA is doing in this aspect. Regarding Bashar Dam, sometimes I wish I was there in Bashar as well, because every household in Bashar has been given 3.5 million in compensation. Other than that, we have built model villages for them to live. We have given them dispensaries, schools, cadet college, water supply schemes, and much more. And if we speak of all WAPDA projects that we are undertaking, WAPDA has allocated 102 billion for social uplift plans. So that's...
Great. Thank you, Husnain. Fazilda, just very quick, please.
Living Indus is... we have to understand it's not just one mega project, it is 25 sub-interventions and 25 projects underneath that umbrella that we call Living Indus. Some of those projects are already ongoing, like the Protected Areas Initiative, like the other afforestation initiatives like Recharge Pakistan, and some of those projects are new. right? Like the 100,000 community ponds project, or the effluent management initiative that we talked about. And like Afia said, it cannot be administered without partnership. Going back to goal 17, partnership is key. You cannot expect the government to come up with the money to fulfill our climate commitments, whether it is towards adaptation or towards mitigation and building resilience. So it has to be in the form of a partnership. Over to you, Basharat.
Okay, just I'll take the question that the young gentleman asked with reference to things that Dr. Hassan Abbas says. So I'm very familiar. I've been having this debate with him for a very long time. Very quickly, so I won't give you answers, but I'll tell you what to do. One, if you want to understand the Indus Water Treaty, the context in which it was made, go and first look at the Dominion Accord between Pakistan and India in 1948, which is how water was being shared between them, in which Pakistan had to pay India for annually for transfer of water based on a certain formula. Right. Secondly, in terms of IFI's coercion to get Pakistan to sign this, 2 years into the Indus Water Treaty process, after all the research and recommendations were done, a proposal was made. India accepted it. Pakistan said it was unacceptable, and that is why it took another 8 years, and only when both parties accepted the terms of it, both reluctantly, by the way. Nehru, who was a democratic leader, right, also had to accept terms which India did not favor India. So it was a compromise, so to say, but that's really the essence of diplomacy. It's compromise. Not one party gets everything. And last thing, on imperial irrigation. Actually, no, I need to first explain what that means. Let's have a chat on imperial irrigation after this. It's a much longer discussion. Thank you.